A ruby worth $40,000 sitting in a display case in a jewelry store in Manhattan left the ground in Myanmar for $35. The man who dug it out is back in the pit today looking for the next one. Between those two prices, there are at least 6 people who touched that stone, each one adding margin, each one moving further from the physical risk and closer to the financial return. The miner absorbed the risk, the chain above him absorbed the value. And that ratio, the gap between what a colored gemstone is worth at the moment it leaves the earth and what it is worth by the time it reaches a retail case, is the defining economic structure of the global gem trade. And understanding it explains almost everything about why people keep going back into the ground for stones worth thousands while earning wages worth almost nothing. The colored gemstone market generated approximately $25 billion in global retail sales in 2023. Sapphires, rubies, and topaz account for a significant portion of that figure, with sapphires and rubies, both varieties of the mineral corundum, commanding the highest prices per carat of any colored stone in consistent demand. The geography of where these stones form is specific and largely uncooperative with economic development. Myanmar produces the finest rubies on earth, and Myanmar is one of the poorest countries in Asia with a military government that has controlled the gem trade as a revenue source since the 1960s. Madagascar emerged as one of the world's most significant sapphire producers in the late 1990s, and Madagascar has a per capita GDP that puts it consistently among the 30 poorest countries on the planet. Brazil holds some of the world's most important topaz deposits, specifically the imperial topaz of Minas Gerais, in a region where informal mining has operated alongside official operations for centuries, with labor conditions that formal economies would not legally tolerate. This is not a coincidence. Gem deposits form where geology dictates, not where infrastructure exists, and the combination of extreme mineral wealth and extreme poverty is not an accident of history. It is a recurring pattern in the economics of extractive resources. To understand why someone risks their life for a sapphire, you first need to understand what that sapphire is actually worth at the moment it comes out of the ground, which is almost nothing in absolute terms, and potentially everything in relative terms depending on where you are standing. Madagascar is currently the world's largest producer of sapphires by volume, with major rushes at Ilakaka in 1998 and subsequent deposits discovered in various provinces since then. A miner in Ilakaka working on alluvial deposit in 2024 earned somewhere between $2 and $6 per day in wages if he is working for a small operation, or earns a share of fine value if he is working independently. The sapphires he finds on most days are small, pale, or heavily included, worth a few dollars to the first local dealer who inspects them. But occasionally, rarely, the gravel yields something different. A stone with saturated color, good clarity, and sufficient size to be cut into a gem that will qualify for the export market. And on that day, the math changes. A 2-carat fine blue sapphire from Madagascar, heated and cut in Bangkok, certified as natural by a recognized laboratory, and offered to a wholesaler in the United States, will move through the market at $1,500 to $4,000 per carat, depending on quality. The miner who found it was paid somewhere between $8 and $40 for the rough stone. The local dealer who bought it from the miner was paid somewhere between $40 and $200 when he sold it to the regional exporter. Every dollar of that spread was decided in a conversation the miner was not part of. The Mogok Valley in northern Myanmar is to rubies what the Napa Valley is to wine, which is to say it is a specific geography that produces a specific quality that the market has decided is the standard against which everything else is measured. Mogok rubies, specifically the finest specimens with what dealers call pigeon's blood color, a saturated, pure red with a slight blue fluorescence that comes from the specific chromium concentration in the marble host rock, have sold at auction for prices exceeding $30,000 per carat for exceptional unheated specimens. A 1-carat pigeon's blood ruby with a Gugolin or GIA certificate confirming Burmese origin and no evidence of heat treatment is one of the most expensive objects per unit of weight that exists in the legal commodity market. A single gram of gold at current prices is worth approximately $63. A single gram of the finest Burmese ruby is worth, at auction prices for exceptional material, somewhere between $100,000 and $1 million. There is no other material on Earth with that price differential relative to its weight except diamonds, and the colored gemstone market produces them with far less industrial infrastructure and far more human risk. Mining in Mogok operates through a layered system that has existed in various forms for centuries, restructured repeatedly by colonial administrators, socialist governments, and most recently by the military junta that took power in February 2021 and has controlled gem production since. Individual miners, called shan or local artisanal workers, dig vertical shafts sometimes 30 to 60 meters deep by hand and rope, hauling gravel to the surface in baskets and washing it through trays of water to separate the heavy corundum crystals from the lighter gravel. The shafts are unsupported in most artisanal operations. They follow the gem gravel layer where it goes, which is not always vertical and not always stable. Informatively, the death rate from mine collapses in artisanal mining globally is impossible to calculate with precision because most deaths in informal operations are never formally reported to any government body. In Myanmar specifically, where the junta government controls official statistics and has little institutional interest in documenting labor conditions in the mining sector, what is documented comes primarily from non-governmental observers, and their estimates suggest that shaft collapse deaths in the Mogok region occur at a rate that would shut down any formally regulated mining operation in a developed economy within weeks of its first accident. The physical risk in artisanal gem mining falls into several overlapping categories, each of which operates on a different timescale and with different probability. Immediate risk is the most dramatic and the least frequent. Shaft collapses kill miners and they kill witnesses, and the fact that they kill in a single moment makes them the event most likely to be observed and remembered. The 2015 jade mine collapse in Hapakant, Myanmar, which killed more than 100 miners when a waste pile gave way during monsoon season, was reported internationally because the scale was too large to ignore. Smaller collapses in gem mining operations across Madagascar, Cambodia, and Myanmar kill miners several times per year in events that generate no international coverage and no official record. Medium-term risk is less visible, but statistically more significant. Miners who spend years working in confined, inadequately ventilated shafts accumulate silica dust in their lungs, developing pneumocanosis, a progressive and irreversible disease, at rates that occupational health researchers who have accessed these communities describe as essentially universal among workers with more than a decade of underground exposure. A miner who survives the collapse risk and the flooding risk and the knife risk and the exploitation risk may still die at 50 of a lung disease that was never diagnosed because he never had access to the chest X-ray that would have identified it at stage 1. The political risk in Myanmar gem mining escalated dramatically after the 2021 military coup and the subsequent international sanctions imposed on Myanmar's gem and sector sander. The United States Treasury imposed sanctions on Myanmar Gem Enterprise, the state-owned entity that controls gem auctions and export licenses, in 2019 under the Global Magnitsar Act, and the European Union followed with similar measures. For buyers in regulated markets, this created a compliance problem. Purchasing rubies or sapphires that passed through the official Myanmar gem auction system exposed importers to sanctions violations, which redirected legal trade toward non-Myanmar sources. For the miners in Mogok, the practical effect was that the official price discovery mechanism for their stones became less relevant because stones that cannot move through official channels moved through unofficial channels at prices that the smuggling margin dictated. The gem smuggling route from Myanmar into Thailand, specifically into the trading centers of Chantaburi and Bangkok, has operated in some form for decades, but after 2021, its volume increased as licensed trade contracted.
A stone that enters Thailand as an undocumented rough from Myanmar can be cut, traded, and eventually certified as Thai origin or origin undisclosed by a Bangkok dealer, which removes the compliance risk at the cost of removing any provenance documentation that would otherwise add value at the high end of the market. The miner gets the same price either way. The compliance risk and the provenance documentation both live somewhere above his level of the chain.
Informational emphasis on certain words. Madagascar entered the sapphire market with a geological rush that has few equivalents in the recent history of the gem trade. In 1998, sapphire deposits were discovered near Elakaka in the Ihosi region, and within months an estimated 100,000 people arrived at what had been a small farming community to work the alluvial deposits. The conditions they created were not a formal mining operation. They were a gold rush in the original chaotic sense, with hand tools, no infrastructure, no water supply, no sanitation, and prices set entirely by the dealers who appeared alongside the miners and established the first market for stones that had never been traded before. By the early 2000s, Ilakaka had become the largest sapphire trading center in the world by volume, with Thai buyers flying in regularly to purchase parcels of rough that would be transported to Bangkok for heating and cutting. The heating process matters for understanding the economics. Sapphires that are heated in a furnace at controlled temperatures can have their color improved significantly, transforming a pale or grayish stone into a vivid blue that commands 3 to 5 times the price of the original unheated material. Heated stones are not considered fraudulent by the gem trade as long as the treatment is disclosed, and virtually all sapphires in the commercial market below the top collector tier have been heated. What heating does economically is shift value creation from the mining country to the processing country. A pale rough sapphire worth $2 in Ilakaka becomes a commercial quality cut stone worth $80 after heating and cutting in Bangkok. The value creation of that $78 increase happened in Thailand, not in Madagascar. Imperial topaz occupies a different market position from sapphires and rubies because topaz as a mineral is extremely common, but the specific variety that carries value is confined to a small geographic area and occurs in quantities that are declining. The Capão mine near Ouro Preto in Minas Gerais, Brazil, is the world's primary source of imperial topaz, the orange to orange-red to pink-red variety that gets its color from chromium content and that has been mined and traded since the 18th century when Portuguese colonial administrators exported it to European courts as a luxury mineral. Imperial topaz at the mine today sells to small dealers at between $50 and $300 per carat for clean material, depending on color saturation, with the finest peachy orange specimens and the extremely rare pink-red variety commanding prices that can exceed $1,000 per carat in rough form. The mining operation at Capão is a combination of formal claim holders and informal garimpeiros, independent artisanal miners who work adjacent claims with hand tools and no formal employer. A garimpeiro at Capão works on the assumption that most days produce nothing of commercial value, and that the occasional significant find produces enough income to justify the accumulated days of nothing. The economics are identical to lottery economics, with better odds, worse working conditions, and no regulatory structure protecting the player. Understanding why someone accepts these odds requires understanding what the alternative looks like. In the Magok Valley in Myanmar, the agricultural income available to a rural family without gem mining access is lower than the average income available through participation in artisanal gem mining, even accounting for the risk premium. In Madagascar's gem rush regions, formal employment options for workers without education credentials are functionally non-existent outside of subsistence agriculture that generates income measured in hundreds of dollars per year. The economic calculation that a miner makes when he descends into an unsupported shaft is not a calculation made in ignorance of the risk. In most cases, it is a calculation made with full awareness of the risk and the conclusion that the expected return, weighted by the small probability of finding something significant, still exceeds the certain return of the available alternatives.
Economists describe this as a compensating differential, the wage premium that a dangerous job must pay above a safe job to attract workers. In artisanal gem mining, the compensating differential is not a wage premium at all. It is a probability premium, the chance of a single find that changes the calculation entirely, and that probability premium is real enough in enough individual cases that it sustains the system. The middle of the gem supply chain, the layer between the artisanal miner and the international export market, operates through a network of local dealers who work in proximity to producing regions and who understand the market well enough to buy below the price they can sell at, while moving faster than anyone in the chain above them can react. A local dealer in Ilakaka who buys a parcel of rough sapphires from 20 different miners in a single morning is doing something the miners cannot do individually. He is aggregating volume, sorting quality, and creating a lot that is large enough to be interesting to the Thai or Sri Lankan buyer who needs a quantity of material large enough to justify the trip. That aggregation function is real, and it has genuine value, which is why it commands a margin. The criticism is not that the dealer takes a margin, it is that in markets where miners have no access to price information, no transportation to alternative buyers, and no capital to hold inventory while they negotiate, the margin the dealer takes reflects his structural advantage rather than the fair market value of his aggregation service. A miner who sells rough to the only dealer in the village that day because he needs cash by evening is not negotiating at market price. He is accepting the price available at the moment of maximum disadvantage, and the buyer knows this, and the price reflects it. The cutting and treatment centers that process the world's gem rough are concentrated primarily in Bangkok, Jaipur, Sri Lanka, and Hong Kong. Bangkok specifically handles an estimated 60 to 70% of the world's commercial sapphire and ruby processing, and the heating furnaces, cutting wheels, and trading networks concentrated there are the infrastructure that transforms rough material with uncertain value into finished goods with predictable market prices. A rough sapphire that arrives in Bangkok as an irregular crystal of uncertain color is tested for treatment potential, heated in a furnace at temperatures between 1600 and 1800 degrees Celsius for periods ranging from hours to days, cut into a shape that maximizes retained weight while optimizing the color presentation for the viewing angle that shows the stone at its best, and traded through a dealer network that has established prices for stones of each quality grade. The cutting loss on a typical sapphire rough is between 50 and 70% by weight. A 5-carat rough that enters a Bangkok cutting house exits as a 2-carat finished stone. The labor to accomplish that transformation costs between $5 and $20 for a commercial quality stone cut by a Thai worker in a production environment. The value added by that transformation, from rough worth $40 to finished stone worth $400, is partially the cutter's work and primarily the knowledge of which shape maximizes the value of the specific rough being cut. Knowledge that took years to develop and that is not compensated at the rate its contribution to value would suggest. Gem certification changed the economics of the high end of the colored gemstone market more profoundly than any other development in the last 50 years. When the Gemological Institute of America, SSEE in Switzerland, or Gobelin in Lucerne issues a certificate confirming that a ruby originated in Myanmar's Mogok region and shows no evidence of heat treatment, that document is worth money independent of the stone it describes. A 1-carat pigeon's blood ruby without a certificate trades at a discount relative to the same stone with a certificate, because the certificate eliminates the uncertainty about the claims being made. An unheated Burmese ruby at auction with Gobelin certification routinely sells at a premium of 30 to 70% over an equivalent unheated ruby from Mozambique without certification, for a combination of reasons that include origin preference among collectors and the practical value of documentation in a market where provenance is contested. The certification itself costs between $200 and $800 for colored stone reports from the top laboratories, which means the economics of certification only make sense for stones above a certain value threshold. Below that threshold, the majority of commercially traded sapphires, rubies, and topaz move without any documentation beyond the dealer's verbal representation, and the price that material commands reflects the discount the market applies to unverifiable claims. The retail markup on colored gemstones in the final consumer market is the layer of the chain where the arithmetic becomes most difficult to defend from the perspective of anyone who has seen what the miner was paid. A jewelry retailer selling a heated Madagascar sapphire set in gold applies a standard retail markup of 2 to 4 times the wholesale cost of the stone, which itself reflects markups through 3 or 4 previous hands. The sapphire that cost the Ilakaka miner his back and his lung health for 2 weeks of work, that he sold for $8, that moved through 3 dealer transactions to a Bangkok cutter, that was heated and cut for $20 in labor, that was sold through 2 wholesale transactions to a New York importer, ultimately retails for $1,100 in a gold ring on a department store counter. The miner's $8 represented roughly 0.7% of the final retail value of the object he spent 2 weeks extracting. The cutting labor that transformed the stone represented roughly 1.8%. The remaining 97.5% was distributed through multiple layers of commerce, transport, insurance, marketing, and retail infrastructure, none of which involved anyone returning to the shaft. Reform in the colored gemstone supply chain moves slowly and against strong economic incentives that benefit the middle and upper layers of the chain at the expense of the bottom. The Responsible Jewelry Council, which operates a certification scheme for jewelers who commit to supply chain transparency standards, has grown its membership substantially since its founding in 2005, but operates primarily on the retail end of the chain, where its members have direct consumer relationships and reputational incentives to demonstrate ethical sourcing. The artisanal mining end of the chain remains largely outside formal certification reach because the transactions between miners and first local buyers happen in conditions where documentation is impractical and where neither party has reason to generate paperwork that might attract government attention or taxation. Fair trade gem initiatives, including the Fair Trade Fair Mined Gold program and specific gem initiatives in Madagascar and Colombia, have created certified supply chains for small volumes of material, but their market share of global production remains below 1%. The economic structure that produces the price gap between miner and retail consumer is not a problem that certification alone can solve, because the gap is not produced by dishonesty. It is produced by the structural advantages of capital, information, and geographical mobility that accumulate at each layer of the chain above the miner, who has none of those advantages and who absorbs the physical risk that everyone above him has priced out of their own position. The miner in Mogok is back in the shaft today because the stone he found last week paid for this month. The miner in Ilakaka is washing gravel in a tray because the alternative is subsistence farming that earns less. The garimpero in Minas Gerais is working a claim near Ouro Preto because his grandfather worked the same mountain and because the chance of a significant find is real enough to justify one more season. The economics of risking your life for sapphires, rubies, and topaz are not irrational from the position of the person making them. They are a rational response to a specific set of options in a specific economic environment. And the system that produces those options is global, and its beneficiaries are distributed across every country where people buy jewelry. The $40,000 ruby in the Manhattan display case is a physical record of that system. Its color is chromium. Its clarity is geology. Its price is the accumulated margin of everyone who touched it after the man who let go.